welcome to ACWS's Outcome Tracker training videos. On this video, I'm going to walk you through how to set up a report. Now, in the previous video, I walked you through how to set up a query and some of the common settings that you would want to adjust on a query. And reports are built from queries. So I think of queries as the foundation and the report as the building. So if you haven't seen the video on how to create a query, or you don't know how to create a query, you will want to go back and view that video before you watch this one, because you need a query in order to make a report. But if you have seen that video and you're comfortable making queries, then let's go on and create a report. So when you log in, if you go to Reports, the Reports tab, and in the upper right-hand corner here, just where we selected to add a new query, we want to add a new report. And I'm just going to call this and so the module will always be cross-tab. You can put a title in it. Titles are useful because you can add more than one module to a report, which means that you can select a report and have the report run multiple reports at the same time. So let's just put a title here. Once you put in a title, it'll ask you to select your query. The query we want is this one. So whichever query you need. So the query is what pulls the information, and the report is what displays the information. So the query you want is whichever one that has the fields that you want to display in the report. So here's where we select our headers. Our headers is what we'll display in the report. The horizontal header, which you'll see here, you can also tell by which one's red. The horizontal header is the one that you select first. I often choose enrollment activities description as the horizontal header because it's sort of a blank field that you can put in that will just display the vertical headers, these, the way that you want. It may not be that you want the enrollment activity description as the horizontal header, or it may be that the enrollment activity description isn't even available, isn't a part of the query, although that should happen less frequently. If you wanted to display the information by date, you could do that. So if you selected enrollment begin date, there would be some options where you could display it by month. So if you wanted to see the favorite animals that people selected along the side here by month along the top, or if you wanted to see age of child by on the side here and the date at the top, you could do that. For now, I'm just going to put in enrollment activity description, which I like to do because it's sort of a blank field and your data will just display along the side as normal. And then, so now we select the vertical headers, which are these along the side here. And these, we want everything that we want to display. So probably these. And you can select them just by pressing Control and then selecting all the ones that you want. One thing to remember about comments and other text fields is that they can make reports look ungainly and awkward. And often when you run a report, what you want is quantitative data. So you want to know how many people chose a certain favorite animal, how many people felt understood by staff, how many people enjoyed activities, so on and so forth. The thing with comments is that hardly anybody is ever going to put the same comment in twice in exactly the same way, which is what you would need to do for those people to be counted together in a report. So those will often not display very useful information in a report, although it could be that you want to display those anyway, maybe just for reference, maybe so you can see what people are saying. But often when I create reports, I find that I leave those out because they're not actually very useful in reports. But it may be the case that you want to see those. So when you select to create your report, it will take you automatically to the Edit tab. I like to hop over to the View tab where you actually look at the report, and I'm going to put in some dates. And again, this report has dates because the query that we pulled these fields from had the dates. So those filters from the query pull through into the report. And we see what we look at. This is what a basic report looks like. Okay. Now I'm going to walk you through some of the basic settings that you might want to adjust when you're creating a report. So let's do that. All of these will probably take place on the Edit tab. One of the things that you might want to do when you create a report is, you'll see here we have the numbers of people who selected these. Often I find that what you really actually want is the percentage, and you do that by going here to Edit Cell. So let's say we want to know the percentage of people who chose Gorilla. We go to Edit Cell. Next to that field, this shows up. What we want is percent of column count. We add that. Now you can delete the count if you only want the percentage, but I find often I want both. So what I'll put in the label is percent of clients, or sorry, number of clients, and then percent of clients, and then update, close. And then you'll see that this updates with this. If we go back to view, we'll see that one person, which is 33% of 3, chose this. Gorilla, so on and so forth. And you'll notice that this actually doesn't equal 3, this equals 4. And that is because this is favorite animal is a multi-select option, which means that you can select more than one. Each person can select more than one. So what happens is that somebody in here selected more than one. And then another common thing you might want to edit is you'll see that this is the number of children the client has. This is a good example of a field that you might want to change from count to sum. So it will actually count up the number of children. So if we go here to Edit Cell, just like we did before, and add a sum value, you have to tell it which field to sum. So the field that we're working on right now is number of children the client has. And we click Update. And I find often when I put in the sum, I don't want the count. Both those informations aren't useful. So basically, I find that when you want the percentage, you usually also want the count. But when you want the sum, you usually don't want the count. So I delete that, close, and then it refreshes. I also find that when I want the sum, I don't want these numbers necessarily to display. So for instance, if this had 10 enrollments and it was like 3 people said 1, 4 people said 2, so on and so forth, I don't want those numbers, I just want the total. So what I will do is I will go into here, and you'll see we have labels, which is this one, data values. When you add it, it looks like this, and total. And what that is basically saying is we have the labels, and the total. We just want the total. So once again, this would be the data labels. And if we were looking at this field up here, these would be the data labels: cat, gorilla, people, none. And then the total. So we just want the total for this particular field. So we'll just delete that, close, and let's take a look at it. And we see we have a total of 2 children for the whole activity. Now, if you are working on a big report and you have to do this over and over again, it's pretty time consuming. There are some little tricks that I have learned to sort of speed things up as I'm doing this. And one of them is I find that grouping like tasks with like tasks really speed things up. So what I often do, let's say for instance that we want to add % of clients to all of these here, which you probably would in this report. You would want to know the % of people who said false. So what I would do is open them all, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, and for the purposes of this video, I'll just stop there. And then I have them all here, so I'll go to the first one, add % of column count, and then put in number of clients, % of clients. And then just to even speed things up a little more, what I usually do is copy this so that at least I have one of these in my copy paste so that I can just sort of update it, close it, and then move on to the next one. Add % of column count, number of clients, and then % of clients. Update, close. And then so on and so forth until you're done. I find that this way is faster to add those sorts of datum, that you don't have to do this over and over again. Otherwise you would be adding and then adding the data and then closing it and then waiting for this to refresh and then coming back to the next one, then adding, and so on and so forth. It still takes time to do things like these on Outcome Tracker, but it takes less time if you can do it a little bit smarter. And I find that that's a better way to do it. Let's say that you have a report and you want to change this. So enrollment activity description is the field, and so if we put favorite animals up here, instead of enrollment activity description, it will say favorite animals. So, but nobody really knows what enrollment activity description is, so let's change that. Let's go to properties. Let's change it to something like report data. Another thing you might find is that when you create the report, you might find that you want to rearrange stuff a little bit. If you want to do that, you can go to Edit Module. Here you can rename the module. You can rearrange the horizontal headers, which is just the enrollment activity description. You can rearrange the vertical headers. Let's say we want to put these 2 questions up here after a number of children the client has. This is another way you can save time a little bit. Instead of going to each one of these and going up, 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 what I would do is highlight the ones that you want to move down and move those down twice instead of moving the 2 that you want to move up 4 times each. It doesn't save a whole lot of time, but if you can shave a few seconds off here and there, often when you're doing these things over and over and over again, as you might often do, every few seconds you can shave off ends up being a lot of time in the end. So let's close that. This will refresh and you'll see that these are here now. So that is how you move things around. This is a useful box. So I want to spend a couple more seconds on here. You can add columns on here. So if you want, if there was something that was in the query, but you didn't put it on the report, and upon further thought, which happens all the time, you actually want to do that. Let's say, for instance, we think after we put the report together, actually role would be really useful in this report, so we can just add that. If you want to take a field off, if you say, oh, what would help is actually a text field, and that's not terribly useful in this report, you can just select it and press select delete. We don't want that. And then I want to show you how to change the horizontal header. You change the horizontal header in exactly the same way that you do the vertical headers. You can add them, you can subtract them. You will often only have one horizontal header, although you can have as many as you want. It can make the report kind of confusing if you have more than one. It's sort of the difference between rows and columns. These are your rows, and these are your columns. And it's better to have fewer columns and more rows in reports, because it just makes a little bit more sense. But let's say that I wanted to change the horizontal header from enrollment activity description to favorite animal. I want to display this information by favorite animal. So what you would think that you would just delete this and then add another one, but the thing is at all times you have to have at least one horizontal header. So you have to head, and the same is true for vertical headers as well. At all times you have to have at least one vertical header. That's not usually a problem, because usually you'll have quite a few vertical headers. It is often a problem in horizontal headers. So you have to add whatever you're going to replace this with before you actually delete. So let's add. And then delete this. Since we've added favorite animals to the horizontal headers, I don't think we want it in the vertical headers anymore. You can keep it. It just repeats. It will be just a repeat of information. I'm doing this in part because you might want to learn how to change those horizontal headers, but also just to give you a glimpse of how a report looks when you have a horizontal header that's not the enrollment activity description. So if we go back, we'll see we have number of children the client has. There's one for cat, there's two for gorilla, one for people, and one for none. Age of the client seems that the person who was 56 years old said that they like all three of these things. As of the person whose age of the first child is 23, the person who did not feel heard and understood by staff, their favorite animal is a gorilla. So you can see how having a different horizontal header breaks down the information in the report. Now if you look here, you'll see that the role does not have a total in it. Let's say we want to put a total in there. We would go to the Edit tab, scroll down to the end, click on Role, and add total all data. Close. And now it has a total. I'm going to change favorite animals back to enrollment activity description. Let's say you were interested in knowing how the client heard about your services broken down by whether or not they felt understood by staff. Let's say you suspect there's a correlation between people who don't feel understood by staff and people who hear about it from the newspaper. So what you would do is you would break this down under this, and I'm going to show you how to do that. This is just a different way that you can display information in your report, and it may be that you never use this. I don't use this too terribly often in Outcome Tracker, but it's quick and easy, and it's not too difficult, and it could bring you clarification on some of your data. So I will show you how to do this. So first off, you have to choose the one that you want to be broken down into a different category. So for instance, we want to know who in here chose newspaper as where they heard about the services. So what we would want to do is choose this one. And when you choose this one, you'll see this familiar window, but we want to go to properties. And we see this thing right here, break down where did you hear about our client services from within each one of these. And what we want is, what did we say? Client felt heard and understood by staff. And let's update that. And let's take a look at that. And so we see that it was pretty false. The person who chose newspaper chose pretty false that they felt understood by staff. Of course, if we had more data in this report, it would give us a lot more detail, but we only have a few responses, so it doesn't show us all that much, but there you go. One of the nice things about Outcome Tracker is that it allows you to put multiple modules into the same report. And what I mean by module is this. So this is basically the report. And how you do that is you can add a new crosstab. And if you have more than one module, it is important to name them, because that way you will know exactly which one you're looking at. So let's name this second test, just to differentiate it from the first. Let's choose next. And this is the same process as creating a report from scratch, because you're doing essentially the same thing. The only difference is that this will be stored in the same place. Now, I'm going to choose the same exact query because I'm just doing this as an example, but if you're doing this, you can choose any query from any activity that you want, because you are additionally creating a second report within this report. So I'll show you what I mean when I create the report. So I'm just going to next. So same thing, horizontal header, I want a normal activity description. And then I'm going to choose all of these. So here's where positioning comes in. So the second report that we're putting in here, we can put it in column 2 or row 2, which means this one is in column 1, row 1 right now. So we can put this beside it or underneath it. I'm going to put it beside. We can also change that later if we decide that we want to have it underneath. And then this will refresh. And there you go. So this is the test exit, and this is the second test. Let's take a look at it. It's the same exact data from the same exact activity, so it's not going to be exactly relevatory. But you can have this be from any query, any activity. It's unrelated to this report, except that they're in the same place and they will run at the same time. So this is useful if you have two reports that you want to run at the same time all the time, and that way you can they'll probably be related reports. So for instance, if you have a education program for high school students, you might want to put it here, and an education program for junior high students might want to put it here. And the prompts will be the same because you have to label the prompts exactly the same, but if you label them exactly the same, which isn't hard to do, then they'll show up as one prompt, and then you can just filter them at the same time together. And then you'll run two reports at once and save a little bit of time. So if that is a little bit more, maybe a little bit more advanced, but it is just as easy as creating one report. The only difference is that you're creating it in the same place. To recap, we walked through how to create a report, how to add fields from a query, how to change fields from count to sum, from count to percentage, or how to add percentages. We also talked about how to break down information into different fields, and we talked about how to rearrange the information on the report, how to rename the fields on the report, and we talked about how to add a second module to a report. So that is how you create a report and some of the basic settings that you might want to change after you've created your report. And thank you for using ACWS's Outcome Tracker training videos.